Okay, I'd like to ask you some fun questions about your relationship and life and other areas that are blooming in your life. So I'd like to know more about how you met your now husband, Bob. How long have you been married?
We've been married for almost a year.
A year.
Right
wow.
before COVID, pre-COVID.
Okay, I can't wait to hear about that experience. But how did you meet Bob, and how did you know? I always ask too many questions than I need to. How did you meet Bob?
Okay, I met Bob at Toastmasters. We were at a leadership institute, which is a training for members or officers in a club. And for those of you who might not know, Toastmasters is an organization focused on public speaking, leadership, and listening skills. And it just has changed my life because of the public speaking and having a fear of it. But I met him at a training. I was walking back into the training to get a book that somebody was selling, and he was walking out, and I had seen him before during the other sessions in the hallway, and I just felt an energy to him, and I said to myself, if I see him again, I'm going to say hi. And so I saw him, and he was the only one walking out of the meeting, and so I stopped and said hi and introduced myself. He says we stopped at the same time, and because he felt a connection as well, and so I just stopped and we connected, and we remained friends for about 6 months until we started dating. But we would send each other quotes, and he was very much into positive phrases and quotes like I was, and I still am. And so we had that connection. Then that's when it happened. Wow. Afterwards. We dated.
So 6 months. Okay, yeah. So you're in the friend zone at 6 months. So who makes the first move? Like, how does it go from friends to, can I take you out on a date?
Yeah, so I guess, he initiated the first conversation from there.
Good.
And he asked me to dinner one night, and we ate dinner at a restaurant in St. Augustine, and then just kind of connected from there.
Were you smitten with him, or did he have to woo you?
I always felt a special connection with him, but it was not really relationship-wise. It was just a good energy. And so we dated a few times until I was like, well, maybe this is right. Actually, it probably wasn't till 6 months after dating him. Mm-hmm. I remember a specific time where we went to Miami, and we went there for 3 days for just a little vacation. When we came back, he asked me, he said, well, what was your favorite part? What was your highlight? That's that's what we do, I guess, that's what we've done prior to that, after having the trip. What's your favorite part? What's your highlight? And he said that, and I thought to myself, just for probably 30 seconds to a minute, what was my favorite part? There were so many of them. But then I started to cry, and I was like, and I said to myself, or I said to him, my favorite part was, and I was sobbing, and he's probably thinking, what did I do wrong? But I'm sobbing, telling him the sunrise that we watched together. We watched the sunrise, and the peace I felt in that moment, because it's interesting, because 2 years prior to that, I asked my aunt, who's in her 80s right now, I asked her what she would want for her family. And she said one word, peace. And to me at that time, it was 2 or 3 years prior, I thought that was the lamest answer that I had ever heard. I literally thought to myself, that's the lamest answer I've ever heard. And so when I finally felt peace, that's when I knew, and it was just a magical moment, because it came full circle. 1 minute in your life you think one thing, and then the next minute you think another, and it just changes your perspective on life. And so I think being open to potentially having peace was a beautiful thing.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, getting married and then the lockdown happened in COVID. So I want to know more about when you were stranded. We've got about 4 minutes left, but were you stranded on your honeymoon?
Yes, we were. We that was the perfect time after we got married to get to know each other, and we got to know each other really well for the shutdown in the pandemic and getting stuck in on our cruise, almost getting stuck. We were leaving. We were in New Zealand and Australia, and
Wow.
we were taking a flight. It was beautiful there, but we were taking a flight back home because we had to cut our Australia trip short because they said nobody can be allowed inside the country anymore. We went straight to the airport that morning. We don't usually get to the airport earlier than 2 hours for an international flight, or 2.5, but we happened to get there 4 hours because what did we have to do? Nothing.
Sure.
We couldn't go to anywhere else. They wanted us directly to the airport. When we flew, we had to transfer to New Zealand. That's part of New Zealand Air, and they were scanning our tickets, and she couldn't scan the ticket. And she's like, well, don't worry, we'll just call them and get the approval code. She calls, gets the approval code, puts it in. Still, it won't let us put it in. And she calls them again. I think she called Immigration Border Patrol. And the lady said, well, they just stopped all transit passengers going to the country of New Zealand. And she said, when? Because literally nobody had heard it. There was 20 people working there. Not one person had heard of it until then.
Wow.
And so we had to rebook on another flight that was, of course, double the price. But honestly, at that time, we were just wanting to get back home. And so we rebooked the ticket, and it was a 40-hour flight. I mean, travel time, because there were no other flights to choose from. We had a layover on Australia for 10 hours, in San Francisco for 12 hours, and then finally made it back home, probably smelling a little funky at the time. But we made it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So how's it been working? Have you both been working from home a little bit last year, or what was that like?
Bob has an office a couple miles away, and so he typically goes to the office, and I will work at home. But during the pandemic, he didn't really go out much either, because especially in the beginning, everything was shut down. So he worked in the house, and I was furloughed, actually part-time. And so we spent a lot of time together. I wasn't expecting to spend that much time with him, but it was great, because I feel like with our relationship, it just seems effortless, and it never has seemed effortless in my previous relationships before. So
That is awesome.
yeah.
Well, great. Thank you for sharing about your
Of
relationship.
course. Yeah,
Any
thank
advice
you.
for young girls out there that are still waiting for their Bob to come into their lives?
That's a great question too. I think the biggest thing for me that helped me going through relationships was the fact that understanding what a relationship was. Yeah, understanding. So reading books on relationships and how-tos, and just focused on understanding, because if you think about it like this, if you're playing any sport, tennis, football, soccer, or basketball, and you don't know the rules to the game, most likely going to fail, right? And so I learned that after years of unhealthy relationships, that I needed to understand relationships better.
Good. Okay, thanks for sharing.
Sure.